This is a human heart, the living, beating heart of a 23-year-old man.
Channel 4 was always looking for creative ways to exploit the new medium.
On March 12, 1957, an operation was performed on Harlow Weaver. This complicated and delicate operation was telecast live on WWJ-TV.
On the show, I get a chance to talk to our viewers and say a lot of nice things about a lot of nice products.
The station also exploited television's vast revenue potential.
Saltine of 1,001 uses.
Your host is Friendly, Dependable Household Finance Corporation. When you have a money problem, you'll find a listing on page 585 of your phone book under Household Finance.
Cigarette ads were banned in 1970, but in the early days, smoke billowed all over your TV set.
This is Dennis James with the finest smoke in the world, Old Gold cigarettes.
And the suds flowed freely.
For a frosty glass of Stroh's beer, the only American beer fire brewed at 2,000 degrees.
The new medium soon exploded with pre-recorded advertising from Detroit businesses.
The Faygo Kid. Which way did he go? Which way did he go? He went for Faygo! He went for Faygo, Magnum Root Beer.
And for decades, created some very unlikely media stars.
You're just going to love the Belvedere job you're going to get. We do good work.
Remember, I'll give you 5 pounds of coffee if I can't beat your best deal. The competition knows me. You should, too.
And lifted a football star off the gridiron and into the stratosphere.
Melfar to the rescue.
Hi, Melfar, your superstar dealer.
In the early days, Channel 4 was also dominant because its network had been pounding the competition.
With a merry Texacoman, tonight we may be showmen. Tomorrow we'll be servicing your cars. And now, ladies and gentlemen, introducing America's #1 television star, Milton Berle.
You know, I can tell when I walk out here that if we have a good audience. I can just look around the audience and see if they're appreciative. Good night.
With visual acts and guests like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Berle's Texaco Star Theater entered the 40s as America's most watched show and put the former vaudevillian on the cover of Time magazine.
Well, better luck next time, fellas.
Yeah, I don't understand it. One hand I should take after all, huh?
NBC's 90-minute live Your Show of Shows starred Sid Caesar, Imogen Coca, Carl Reiner, and Howard Morris, and was the most sophisticated comedy variety show of the era.
Holly, please. 6 cards, misdeal. Throw your hands up.
In 1952, at 7 a.m., NBC debuted Today, the first network morning show. To spark tepid early ratings, host Dave Garroway added a rambunctious chimpanzee named J. Fred Muggs.
Look out! You got your own desk. Now go away.
The show eventually launched others to media stardom like Hugh Downs, Joe Garagiola, and Barbara Walters. And in 1954, an NBC first, Coast to Coast Color.
Color, the fabric of the rainbow riding piggyback on an invisible stream of electrons. The Tournament of Roses in Pasadena, California. Telecast in color by 21 stations of the NBC network.
The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported some sat in speechless disbelief as though a miracle was transpiring before their eyes. Also in color on Channel 4, the Lions would win their last NFL title.
Sunday, December 29th, 1957, and the eyes of the sports world turned to Detroit, Michigan for professional football's World's Championship. A sellout crowd numbering more than 55,000 makes its way into Briggs Stadium.
Cleveland featured Rookie of the Year Jim Brown. And with Tobin Road in at quarterback for Bobby Lane, out with a broken leg.
George Wilson sends his place-kicking unit into action with instructions for Jim Martin to attempt a 4th down field goal. Tobin Road takes the entire stadium by surprise with a fake field goal. The gamble pays a handsome dividend. Steve Junker completes a tricky 26-yard TD play, and the Lions have everything going their way.
They win the title 59-14, and as Detroiters well know, they haven't come close ever since. In September 1954, NBC debuted The Tonight Show.
From New York City, the National Broadcasting Company presents Tonight. starring Steve Allen.
In 57, Allen gave way to Jack Parr, a brilliant monologist like the one about his beloved German Shepherd.
When I told you about saying dog on the paper, but not when I'm reading it, you know. This is the most intelligent dog. German Shepherds, I mean, they don't do tricks like poodles. Poodles will do any little trick. German Shepherds read, they bake cakes, they do marvelous.
Johnny Carson replaced Parr in 1962.
Here's Johnny.
And for the next 30 years, introduced the world to virtually every star in the galaxy.
Would you welcome Robin Williams?
Yeah.
I've been watching the Supreme Court hearings. It's a little amazing. Mr. Thomas, your opinion of Roe versus Wade? I'd prefer to float. Okay, come on now. Come on, give us an opinion! Tell us something!
Locally, Channel 4 had its own unique entry in the variety show format.
Following NBC's Today Show every morning at 9 o'clock, Living gives the women in WWJ-TV's audience, and some of the men too for that matter, something that is especially theirs. Living is built around handsome exercise man Ed Allen.
1, 2, 3, and stop. All right, that's the way to do it. Get mad at that waistline.
Living's so-called common sense counselor, Lorene Babcock, often gave cringe-worthy advice.
So if you think you're a neglected wife, I have some suggestions. First, stop suspecting other people and start suspecting yourself. Then lose about 30 pounds, take the rollers out of your hair, and pull up your socks.
Like domestic discourse, political discourse in the 60s would also never be the same.
Good evening. The candidates need no introduction. The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy.
You've got the young, very good-looking man from Massachusetts, and Richard Nixon. And it is said he lost that election based upon those debates, not because of what he said, because of how he looked. He broke into a sweat.
The 4 debates were the first televised and remain the most watched in history. Kennedy came off as a cool presence in the face of Cold War threats.
If we do well here, if we meet our obligations, if we're moving ahead, then I think freedom will be secure around the world. If we fail, then freedom fails.
In '62, Democrat Jerome Kavanaugh became mayor of Detroit. Just 34 years old, Kavanaugh was compared to Kennedy and billed Detroit as a city on the move and as a champion of civil rights.
Yes, Detroit is enjoying its finest hour, an exciting place to be, to live, to grow, to work shoulder to shoulder, regardless of national origin, color, or creed.
The United States Olympic Committee has chosen Detroit, Michigan, as its nominee for the 1968 Olympic Games. Detroit is the center of a great sports community in central United States.
Detroit would lose the '68 games to Mexico City, and less than 2 months after Kennedy endorsed Detroit, his assassination would transfix the nation amid even more shocking drama.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's a man with a gun. Absolute panic.
I was glued to the television. Life-changing events occurred and came home to us through that little box. And I remember the reporters that were on the scene and how they reported that story. And, there was something that just connected in me that said, I want to do that.
TV's stark visual evidence of police violence perpetrated on peaceful protesters diffused any attempt to minimize the righteousness of the civil rights movement. In June '63, TV captured live Governor George Wallace blocking a black student from entering the University of Alabama and then being removed after Kennedy mobilized the National Guard. Here in Detroit, Martin Luther King led a 125,000-strong Walk to Freedom down Woodward Avenue.
I just remember my parents telling us that we were going to take part in a march in Detroit, and it resonated not only in my household, but in households across the country. African American, white Americans, Asian Americans, indigenous people as well. And for him to come to Detroit, my father wasn't going to let us miss that.
In Washington 2 months later, King spoke of his dream of equality for all, a message he had begun perfecting in Detroit. NBC's Meet the Press was the first program to feature African-American guests, including Dr. King.
I would think that the march did more to dramatize the indignities and the injustices that Negro people continue to face in the state of Alabama and many other sections of the South.
The TV industry had to face its own history of racial stereotyping.
Hello, folks.
Amos and Andy ran in syndication on radio and TV until 1966, when it could no longer be justified.
I want to have a talk with my old friend, Fidgety Brown.
NBC countered with I Spy in 1965, starring Robert Culp and Bill Cosby as secret agents and best friends who occasionally clashed on the job.
Get out of the way, make it. No, man. Hey, come on now. Scotty, come on, get out of it. I said no, didn't I?
His character was more intelligent than Robert Culp's character. I mean, he was the brains of the operation, I Spy. I remember as a child watching TV and my father would yell, "Colored on TV," because it was so rare to see a black person on TV that things stopped. We raced to the TV just to see a person who looked like us on the screen, because that just didn't happen. And then to see Bill Cosby break that barrier so convincingly.
Cosby won 3 consecutive Emmys for Outstanding Actor in a Leading Dramatic Role. I Spy led to other roles for blacks, like NBC's Julia, starring Diane Carroll as a widowed nurse.
Mrs. Baker, can Corey have a color TV?
I've been asked that question before, and the answer is still the same.
What? Not until our budget can afford it.
That's right.
For WWJ-TV, the 60s was another decade of local domination, until it wasn't.